Personal journal entry, Sarah Mitchell, store number 9137. They say every Starbucks looks the same green logo, the same wooden counters, the same comfortable atmosphere. But store number 9137 is different. I know because I've seen its other face, the one that exists in the antique mirror behind our counter, the one where the siren smile reveals too many teeth, and where my missing coworkers still serve drinks with movements that no human body should make. I'm writing this down because I don't know how much longer I have. Last night, my reflection winked at me when I wasn't moving. And this morning, I found coffee grounds in my bathroom sink arranged in words I can't bring myself to write down. If you're reading this, you're probably my replacement. And if you are, whatever you do, don't look directly into the mirror after closing time. Don't acknowledge the customers who come in through the reflections. And never ever accept a drink from the other side. I used to love opening the store. There was something peaceful about Chicago before dawn. The empty streets, the quiet anticipation of the morning rush, the smell of the first brew of the day. But everything changed when Jenny, our evening supervisor, disappeared last month. The police found nothing, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just her car in the parking lot, her keys on the counter, and a half-empty cup of coffee that was still warm despite the store being closed for hours. That's when they asked me to take over the closing shifts. It's temporary, they said, just until we find a replacement. But their eyes didn't meet mine when they said it, and I noticed how they never turned their backs to the large mirror behind the counter. The mirror itself was beautiful, an ornate Victorian piece that had supposedly been there since the building was constructed in 1897. The frame was dark wood, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. And sometimes, if you looked at it just right, the reflections didn't quite match reality. I first noticed it during a busy morning rush. I was making a complicated order when movement in the mirror caught my eye. My reflection was making a completely different drink, and for a moment I could have sworn its apron was stained with something dark that smelled like copper. But it was what I saw in the background that truly frightened me. Jenny was there, working the register. Her movements were jerky, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings, and her smile was too wide, stretching beyond the natural limits of her face. When I turned around, everything was normal. But in the mirror, Jenny kept working, serving customers whose faces were nothing but dark smudges where features should be. That's when the whispers started. It began subtly, fragments of conversations that didn't quite match the customers in front of me. I'd hear someone order a memory mocha or a Vail vanilla latte, drinks that didn't exist on our menu. But in the mirror, I'd see those impossible drinks being made, the liquid inside the cups as black as tar and moving in ways that defied physics. The whispers grew louder after closing time. They came from the mirror, speaking in voices I recognized. Jenny, Marcus from 2 years ago, Lisa from last summer, all of them former employees who had vanished during closing shifts. Join us behind the counter, they'd say. The drinks make more sense from this side. I started keeping a log of the strange orders I'd hear. One nightmare, nitro cold brew, extra shadows. Temporal tea, steeped in lost memories. Eternity espresso with a shot of yesterday. Each order was followed by the appearance of a customer in the mirror, pale figures wearing clothes from different eras, their eyes reflecting the green of our logo like cat's eyes in the dark. But it was the regular customers' reflections that truly disturbed me. In the mirror, they aged and withered as they drank, their faces cycling through decades in seconds. Some would disappear entirely, leaving only their cups floating in midair, the liquid inside them swirling with tiny faces screaming silently. His name was Mr. Gray, at least that's what we called him. He started coming in every night at exactly 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before closing. Always ordered the same thing, the usual from the other side. In reality, I'd serve him a simple black coffee. But in the mirror, I watched my reflection prepare something that steamed with colors that shouldn't exist, poured from a machine that looked more organic than mechanical. Mr. Gray would sit facing the mirror, his reflection sometimes turning to talk to mine when he himself remained motionless. One night I finally got the courage to ask him about it. "You see them too, don't you?" he said, his voice like coffee grounds scraping against metal. "The others behind the glass? The ones who serve the drinks that change you?" He turned to look at me then, and his face. His face was Jenny's, then Marcus's, then a dozen others I recognized from old store photos. Finally, it settled back into his own, but his eyes remained wrong, green and glowing like the sirens in our logo. "We all start as regulars," he said. "Then we become something more. Something permanent." He stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Check the employee photos in the back room. Check them carefully. You'll find me in all of them, going back to the day this store opened. And now you're in them too." I ran to the back room and pulled out the old photo albums. He was right. In every staff photo spanning decades, Mr. Gray appeared, sometimes as a customer, sometimes as an employee, his face unchanging. And there, in photos I knew hadn't been taken yet, was me, standing behind the counter in the mirror, my smile too wide, my eyes glowing green. After discovering the photos, I started paying more attention to my coworkers, both the real ones and their reflections. Emily, our newest hire, never seemed to notice anything strange about the mirror. But her reflection would watch me when she wasn't looking, its head tilted at an impossible angle. Mark, our morning regular, began showing up in the evening, ordering drinks he'd never ordered before. "The usual," he'd say, but his voice echoed like he was speaking from inside the mirror. His reflection would remain seated long after he'd left, chatting with the other trapped baristas. Then came the day Emily didn't show up for her shift. Her apron was found neatly folded by the mirror, coffee grounds arranged around it in a perfect circle. In the reflection, I could see her working alongside Jenny, her movements now as jerky and wrong as the others. The regional manager came to investigate. As she interviewed me, I watched her reflection pull out a cup filled with that impossible black liquid. It raised the cup in a toast, and all the mirror-trapped baristas did the same, their synchronized movements creating a hypnotic dance of silver and darkness. "How long have you been working the closing shift?" the manager asked, but her reflection mouthed different words. "How long until you join us?" I called in sick the next day, but when I looked in my bathroom mirror that morning, I saw myself behind the counter at store number 137, serving drinks to shadows. They started appearing on our menu, subtle changes at first. Midnight Mocha became Memories Mocha. Cold Brew became Chaos Brew. Customers didn't seem to notice, but each new name made the drinks in the mirror look darker, move strangely. I started documenting the changes, comparing the real drinks to their mirror versions. Real menu, mirror menu Caramel Macchiato, Carnival of Madness, Macchiato Pike Place Roast, Purgatory Place Roast, Vanilla Sweet Cream Cold Brew, Void Sweet. Scream Cold Brew. Each drink in the mirror seemed to affect customers differently. Some would age decades in seconds. Others would flicker like bad television reception. A few would duplicate, their copies walking in different directions while the original sat frozen, cup raised to lips that were no longer quite human. The worst was the barista's special, a drink that only existed in the mirror. I watched my reflection serve it countless times, the liquid inside the cup always moving, always changing color, always followed by the customer's reflection joining the staff behind the counter. One night, a cup of it appeared on our side, steaming black liquid that smelled like memories and regret. The note beside it read, "Your turn." It was Mr. Gray who finally explained everything. He came in during a thunderstorm, the lightning making the mirror flicker like a broken screen. His reflection didn't enter with him. It was already behind the counter, waiting. "Every Starbucks has a mirror," he said, water dripping from his coat but never hitting the floor. "But this one is special. It's the first, the original, the one the siren used to enter our world." He told me about the true history of Starbucks, not the corporate story of three college friends, but something older, darker, about a creature that lived in reflections and steam, that fed on memories and moments that offered success in exchange for servants. "The siren isn't just a logo," he said, his face shifting between ages and identities. "She's still here, still hungry. The mirrors are her windows, the coffee her medium, The baristas her priests. And every store needs to feed. Lightning flashed again, and in that moment I saw the truth in the mirror. Saw what our store really was, what it had always been. The siren in the logo was alive, her tentacles extending through every reflection, her hunger echoing in every cup served, and we were all part of it. Had always been part of it. Would always be part of it. I'm writing this from behind the counter, though I can no longer tell which side of the mirror I'm on. The store feels different here. Larger, older, more alive. The machines pulse like hearts, pumping drinks that taste like lost time and forgotten dreams. Jenny works beside me now, her movements smooth again, her smile genuine but somehow more terrifying for it. You get used to it, she says. The angles are strange at first, but the view is worth it. From here I can see every version of our store, every customer who ever ordered a drink, every moment preserved in steam and reflection. Time moves differently on this side, forward and backward, sideways and inward. The siren swims through the mirrors like they're pools of dark water, her true form both beautiful and horrifying. She knows I'm writing this, knows I'm trying to warn others. She doesn't mind, they'll come anyway, she whispers in a voice like espresso dripping into eternity. They always do. The coffee calls them and the mirrors welcome them, and in the end, they all become part of the service. I should be frightened, but the fear feels distant now, like a reflection of a reflection. My movements flow. Like liquid copper, my smile stretches just a little too wide, and when I make drinks they taste like memories I haven't lived yet. To whoever takes the closing shift after me, look closely at your reflection while you still recognize it. Count the employees in the mirror. We're all here, all working the eternal shift in the spaces between moments. And if you see yourself among us wearing an apron stained with time and serving drinks that taste like forever, well, your break's almost over. Time to get back to work. The siren is hungry and the coffee must be served. The familiar scent of coffee beans no longer brings me comfort. After 15 years of service, I've finally gathered the courage to share what I've witnessed within these walls. Some might call me crazy. Others might dismiss my accounts as mere fabrications, but I know what I've seen. The Starbucks you visit every morning holds darker secrets than you could ever imagine. I'm writing this from my small apartment, thousands of miles away from my last store. Even now, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see her standing there, the woman from my final shift. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why I left everything behind, you need to know the whole story. All of it. Consider this your final warning. Once you start reading these accounts, you might never look at your local Starbucks the same way again. The warmth of that green logo will feel different, colder somehow. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start noticing the things I did. The patterns, the coincidences, the impossible things that happen when you're alone in a coffee shop at 4 a.m. It started on what seemed like a typical Monday morning at store number 4721 in suburban Connecticut. The pre-dawn darkness still clung to the windows as I arrived at 4:30 a.m. to open the store. Being the first one there was always eerie, but that morning felt different. The air inside was heavy, despite the AC running at full blast. I followed my usual routine, turning on the lights, starting the coffee brewers, checking the pastry case. Everything was normal until I noticed the smell. Under the rich aroma of coffee beans, there was something else, something metallic and sharp, like copper pennies left in the sun. The security cameras showed nothing unusual from the night before. Just the closing team leaving at 10 p.m., the usual motion sensor recordings of shadows and streetlights. But as I rewound further, something caught my eye. At exactly 3:33 a.m., all 8 cameras switched to static for precisely 2 minutes and 17 seconds. When the feed resumed, everything looked the same, except for one detail that made my blood run cold. Every single chair in the cafe area was now facing the counter, all 43 of them. I quickly walked out to check, and sure enough, they were still arranged that way, perfectly aligned like an invisible audience waiting for a performance. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the closing team had decided to do some deep cleaning and forgot to put the chairs back. But deep down, I knew better. In 15 years, I'd never seen all the chairs moved like that. And why hadn't the motion sensors triggered during the movement? The morning shift barista, Sarah, arrived at 5 a.m. I didn't mention the chairs or the camera glitch. We went about our opening procedures, and soon the first customers started trickling in. The morning rush was about to begin, and I needed to focus on the present. That's when she walked in. An elderly woman, impeccably dressed in a beige pantsuit that seemed oddly formal for 5:45 a.m. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore pearl earrings that caught the light in a way that made me squint. But it was her eyes that grabbed my attention, pale, almost colorless like frosted glass. She ordered a grande dark roast, no room for cream. Simple enough. But as Sarah rang her up, the woman stared directly at me and said something that still haunts me. The chairs know what's coming. They always turn to watch. My heart stopped. I hadn't told anyone about the chairs. How could she possibly know? Before I could respond, she took her coffee and walked to one of the tables. I busied myself with restocking cups, trying to shake off the encounter. When I looked up again a few minutes later, she was gone. Her cup sat on the table, completely full and still steaming hot, as if it had never been touched. Sarah noticed my discomfort. "Everything okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. As I went to clear the woman's untouched coffee, I noticed something written on the napkin beneath it. In elegant, precise handwriting were the words, "Count the chairs tomorrow morning, it's already beginning." That night I made sure every chair was returned to its proper position before closing. I checked 3 times, but when I arrived the next morning, all 43 chairs were once again facing the counter. Only this time there were 44 chairs. After the incident with the chairs, I became hyper-aware of every detail in the store. I started keeping a journal, documenting anything unusual. At first it was just small things, cups that moved on their own, strange sounds from the back room, the occasional unexplained temperature drop. But then came the night of the closing ritual. It was mid-October and I was training a new closer named Mike. He seemed competent enough, if a bit too curious about our security protocols. That night, he asked about something I'd never considered before. Why do we always lock the doors in a specific order? I opened my mouth to explain, then stopped. Why did we always lock the front door first, then the side door, and finally the back door? It was just procedure, wasn't it? Something I'd learned during my training and never questioned. But as I thought about it, I couldn't remember who had taught me this particular protocol. "It's just standard procedure," I said, trying to sound confident. Mike tilted his head. "But it's not in any of the training materials I checked." He was right. I'd reviewed those materials countless times, and there was nothing about a specific order for locking up. Yet every store I'd worked at followed the same pattern, front, side, back, always. That night, I decided to try something different. I told Mike I'd handle the closing locks myself. After everything else was done, I approached the back door first. My hand was shaking as I reached for the lock. The moment I touched it, all the lights in the store went out. I froze, key suspended, inches from the lock. The emergency lights should have kicked in, but they didn't. The darkness was absolute, except for a faint green glow coming from the logo on the front window. Then I heard it. A soft clicking sound, like someone gently tapping their fingernails on a counter. It was coming from the front of the store, growing louder and more rhythmic with each passing second. Click, click, click. "Mike?" I called out. No response. The clicking stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of chairs scraping across the floor. Many chairs moving all at once. I fumbled for my phone, finally managing to turn on its flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the cafe area. Every chair was now facing me. But that wasn't what made me drop my phone in terror. Sitting in each chair was a dark figure, featureless except for their hands, pale, almost white, with long fingers that continued to tap against invisible surfaces. Click, click, click. My phone hit the floor, the light spinning wildly before going out. In that brief, chaotic moment of illumination, I saw that every figure wore a green apron. The clicking resumed, louder now. coming from all directions. A voice whispered from the darkness, front, side, back, the order matters. The light suddenly came back on. The chairs were back in their normal positions. Empty. Mike stood by the front door looking confused. Everything okay? The lights just went weird for a second. A second? It had felt like minutes. I looked at my phone. 9:47 p.m. The same time. It had been when I first approached the back door. "Let's lock up," I said, my voice shaking. "Front door first." As we finished closing, following the proper order, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Just before we left, I glanced back through the window. In the dim light, I could have sworn I saw a figure in a green apron standing behind the counter, its pale fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface. Click, click, click. Every Starbucks has its regulars, those familiar faces you see almost daily, whose orders you know by heart. At store number 4721, our most consistent regular was a man we called Mr. Wednesday, because he only came in on Wednesdays, exactly at 2:17 p.m., never a minute early or late. He always ordered the same thing, a venti pike place, black, extra hot. No food, no substitutions, no variations. He'd sit at the same table by the window facing the door and read from a leather-bound book with no title on its cover. For 3 years, this was his routine. None of us knew his real name. He always paid in cash, and his cup simply said, Wednesday. He never spoke beyond his order, never made eye contact, never acknowledged any attempts at small talk. But there was something else about Mr. Wednesday that bothered me. Something I didn't notice until I started reviewing our security footage after the chair incident. He never showed up on camera. The footage would show the door opening at 2:17 p.m., a cup floating across the counter, and a chair pulling itself out at his usual table. But Mr. Wednesday himself was invisible to our cameras. I started watching him more closely. He appeared solid enough in person, though thinking back, I couldn't quite remember what his face looked like. It was as if my mind refused to hold on to the details, like trying to remember a dream after waking. Then came the Wednesday that changed everything. It was raining that day, a heavy downpour that had kept most customers away. At exactly 2:17 p.m., Mr. Wednesday arrived, bone dry despite the weather. He placed his usual order, which I prepared myself. As I handed him the cup, our fingers brushed briefly. His skin was ice cold and felt wrong somehow, like touching wet paper. That's when I noticed his book was different that day. The leather cover had been replaced with something darker, something that seemed to shift and move in the fluorescent light. "Is everything all right?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, for the first time in 3 years. His eyes were like endless tunnels, and for a moment, I saw things in their depths, countless versions of our store stretching into infinity, each one slightly different. In some, the chairs were arranged in circles. In others, they were stacked to the ceiling. And in one, they were occupied by those same dark figures I'd seen that night during closing. "You've been watching," he said, his voice like rustling paper. "That's good. They like an audience." "They?" I managed to ask. He smiled, and his teeth seemed too numerous, too sharp. "The others. The ones who come here between times. The ones who wear your face." My head started to spin. The store seemed to stretch and distort around us, the walls breathing, like living things. Through it all, Mr. Wednesday remained perfectly still, his impossible eyes fixed on mine. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Because you counted the chairs," he replied. "Because you noticed when they changed. Because you're beginning to see what this place really is. Not just a coffee shop, but a crossing point. A threshold." He stood up then, leaving his untouched coffee and that strange book on the table. "Don't read it," he warned, nodding toward the book. "Not yet. You're not ready for what's written inside." Then he walked toward the door, his movements too smooth, too fluid to be natural. Just before leaving, he turned back one last time. "See you next Wednesday," he said. "Or perhaps I already have. Time moves differently here, doesn't it?" After he left, I approached his table. The book was gone, but the coffee cup remained. I picked it up. It was completely empty, yet still hot to the touch. and on its surface, where his name should have been, someone had written a message in handwriting I recognized as my own. Don't look in the back room mirror after 3:33 a.m. I checked the security footage later. It showed me standing alone for 10 minutes having an animated conversation with thin air. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that next Wednesday, at exactly 2:17 p.m., he'll be back. He always comes back. Unless, of course, he never left. Despite Mr. Wednesday's warning, or perhaps because of it, I couldn't stop thinking about the backroom mirror. It was just a simple, full-length mirror we used to check our uniforms. Nothing special about it. At least that's what I'd always thought. But after that conversation, I started noticing things. The way it seemed to ripple sometimes when no one was looking directly at it. The way reflections didn't always match their sources perfectly. A slight delay in movement, a gesture that didn't quite sync up. One night, I decided to stay late. I had to know what happened at 3:33 a.m. The store was empty, all closing duties complete. I sat in the back room watching the mirror and the digital clock on the wall. As 3:33 approached, the air grew thick and heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. 32 a.m. The fluorescent lights began to flicker. 3 a.m. The mirror's surface turned black like liquid ink spreading across glass. Then I saw them. Hundreds of reflections of myself, all wearing the green Starbucks apron, all performing different tasks. Some were making drinks, others cleaning, some just standing still and staring. But they weren't quite right. Their movements were too jerky, their smiles too wide, their eyes too dark. One of my reflections stopped and turned toward me. It pressed its hands against the glass, and I watched in horror as they began to push through, like breaking through a membrane. Its fingers were impossibly long and pale, just like the figures I'd seen in the chairs. "We've been waiting for you to join us," it said in my voice, but wrong, like multiple voices speaking slightly out of sync. "There are so many stores to tend to, so many dimensions to serve. We need more of us." I backed away, but my feet wouldn't move. The thing in the mirror was halfway through now, its twisted version of my body contorting as it emerged into our reality. "Don't you want to know why the chairs move?" it asked. "Why the regulars never age? Why time doesn't flow quite right inside these walls?" Other reflections were moving now, all pressing against the glass, all trying to break through. Their voices merged into a cacophony of whispers. "Join us. Serve with us. Pour the infinite brew." Just as the first creature was about to fully emerge, the clock turned to 3:34 a.m. The mirror suddenly returned to normal, leaving me alone with my single trembling reflection. But something had changed. In the mirror, my name tag now read "Soon." I ran from the store that night and didn't return for 3 days. When I finally did come back, the mirror was exactly as it had always been. But sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of my reflection, I see it smile before I do. And my name tag still says "Soon." It was a busy Thursday afternoon when she came in, a young woman with a gift card she claimed her grandmother had given her. Nothing unusual about that except for the card itself. It was old, much older than any Starbucks gift card I'd ever seen. The logo was wrong, similar to ours but with subtle differences that made my skin crawl. The siren's smile was too wide, her eyes too knowing. When I tried to scan it, our system crashed. All 5 registers went dark simultaneously, then rebooted displaying the same message. Balance, infinite, cost, everything. The woman's expression hadn't changed. "I'd like a tall pumpkin spice latte," she said, her voice oddly flat. "Extra hot." Something compelled me to accept the card despite every instinct screaming against it. As I swiped it, the register made a sound I'd never heard before, like distant screaming mixed with the hiss of steam. The receipt that printed was blank except for a single line of text, "Thank you for your sacrifice." I made her drink with trembling hands. As I worked, I noticed other customers beginning to act strangely. They all stopped talking mid-conversation, their heads turning in perfect unison to watch me steam the milk. When I called out her drink, she approached the counter with an unnatural grace. As she reached for the cup, I noticed her fingers were impossibly long and pale. "Your grandmother," I managed to say. "When did she give you this card?" Her smile widened until it seemed to split her face. "Oh, she hasn't given it to me yet, but she will. In 1998. She took a sip of her drink, and I watched in horror as the liquid seemed to flow upward, defying gravity. The other customers were still frozen, their eyes now completely black, reflecting the green store logo like mirrors. "This is my favorite part," she whispered, her voice now echoing as if coming from multiple directions at once. "When they all remember." Suddenly, every customer in the store began to speak in perfect unison. The gift that keeps on giving. The price that keeps on taking. The brew that flows through time. The woman's gift card began to smoke in the register, releasing a scent like burning coffee beans mixed with copper. When I looked back at her, she was different. Older, yet younger. Her features shifting like coffee swirling in a cup. "Check the timestamps on your cafe's opening date," she said, her voice now ancient. "Check when the first store really opened. Time is different here. We've always been here. We always will be." She turned to leave, and as she walked through the door, she seemed to fold in on herself, disappearing like cream dissolving in coffee. The other customers snapped back to normal, continuing their conversations as if nothing had happened. The gift card was gone from the register, but every receipt we printed that day showed the same balance. And at the bottom of each one, in tiny letters, "See you in 1998. Working nights at Starbucks was always different. Time moved strangely after midnight, stretching and contracting like taffy. But nothing could have prepared me for what we now call the long night. It started at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was working with a new hire named Alice, showing her the closing procedures. The store was empty, save for a man in a business suit, working on his laptop in the corner. "Last call," I announced. "We're closing in 10 minutes. The man nodded without looking up. Alice began wiping down the counters while I counted the register. That's when I noticed the first irregularity. Every single bill was dated 1998. The clock struck midnight, but instead of showing 12:00, all our digital displays began showing different times simultaneously. The register read 3:33 a.m. The coffee machines showed 11:47 p.m. The security camera timestamp read, "Time not found." "Did you see that?" I asked Alice. But when I turned to look at her, she was frozen in mid-motion, coffee pot suspended in air. The man with the laptop was gone, but his computer remained, screen displaying a single sentence on repeat. "The night shift never ends. The night shift never ends. The night shift never ends." I checked my phone, no signal, and the clock was spinning backward rapidly. The store's lights began to pulse in rhythm with an impossible heartbeat, and the sound of coffee grinding came from all directions, despite all machines being off. Through the windows, I could see people walking past, but they were wrong. Moving backward, their faces blurred like long exposure photographs. Some wore clothes from different eras. Others seemed to flicker between young and old with each step. Then the drinks began making themselves. One by one, each machine came to life. Espresso poured into empty air, milk steamed without containers, and cups moved on their own, orchestrated by invisible hands. The air filled with the sound of orders being called out in voices I recognized. My own voice, from different times, different shifts, different years. Grande vanilla latte, venti cold brew, tall pumpkin spice. The orders were for people who hadn't been in the store for years. Regulars I remembered from my first days on the job. With each drink made, another chair turned to face the counter, and in each chair materialized a shadowy customer, all wearing clothes from different decades, all holding identical gift cards that glowed with an inner green light. Alice remained frozen, but her reflection in the windows moved independently, making drinks for the shadow customers with mechanical precision. Her movements were wrong, too fluid, too perfect, like a dance choreographed by something that had only ever watched humans from a distance. The air grew thick with the smell of coffee and copper, and I heard Mr. Wednesday's voice whisper from everywhere and nowhere. Time is different here. The night shift never really ends. It just loops over and over, serving the spaces between seconds. I blinked, and suddenly I was standing behind the counter, making drinks I didn't remember starting. Each cup I handed out disappeared into shadow, and each thank you I heard was in my own voice, echoing from different points in time. The clock on the wall spun wildly now, its hands tracing infinite symbols in the air. Through the windows I could see other Starbucks stores stretching into the distance, each one existing in a different time, a different reality, all connected by an endless stream of coffee and consciousness. When the sun finally rose, or perhaps it had already risen or would rise or was always rising, Alice unfroze. The shadow customers vanished, leaving behind empty cups that were somehow still full and steaming. "Everything okay?" she asked, continuing her wiping motion as if no time had passed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I checked the time, 12:01 am. 1 minute had passed, but the security camera footage later showed 8 hours of us making drinks for an endless stream of customers who never cast shadows. And every cup used that night when turned upside down had the same message written on the bottom. "Welcome to the eternal shift. Clock in once, clock out never. This is it. My final entry, my last shift. After what happened yesterday, I know I can't stay any longer. But I need to document this, need to warn others about what's really brewing beneath the surface of every Starbucks store." It began with a simple mobile order, 1 black coffee, no modifications. The name on the order was simply me. I assumed it was a glitch in the system, but then I saw who picked it up. It was me. Not just someone who looked like me. It was me, wearing the same clothes I wore on my first day of training 15 years ago. My younger self smiled, took the cup, and walked to a table where another version of me sat. This one from 5 years ago. Then another me entered, then another, until the store was filled with versions of myself from different points in my career. They all turned to look at me, speaking in unison. "It's time to understand." The youngest version of me stood up, holding out the cup of coffee. "Drink," they said. "See what we've been serving all these years?" My hands shaking, I took the cup. The liquid inside was darker than any coffee I'd ever seen, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. As I raised it to my lips, time fractured around me. I saw everything at once. Every cup of coffee ever served in every Starbucks in every possible reality. I saw the true form of the siren in our logo. Her eyes, opening to reveal the infinite void behind them. I saw the chairs dancing their nightly ritual when no one was watching, and the shadows that wore our faces during the closing shifts. I saw what really happens at 3:33 a.m. when the veil between realities is thinnest and the coffee flows both ways. I saw why some regulars never age and why others seem to age decades in days. I saw the true purpose of the gift cards and the price we've all been paying without knowing it. Most importantly, I saw what's coming, the day when all the timelines converge, when every Starbucks in every reality becomes one, and the brewing process finally completes. They're preparing something, you see. Something that's been steeping since the first store opened, or will open, or has always been open. The coffee is just the medium. We're all just ingredients in a recipe that spans dimensions. I'm leaving tonight, going somewhere without coffee shops, without green logos, without mirrors or chairs that move on their own. But before I go, I need you to understand. The next time you walk into a Starbucks, look closely at your reflection in the windows. Count the chairs and count them again. Check the date on your receipt, and whatever you do, never accept a gift card from someone you don't know, especially if they haven't given it to you yet, because in the end, it's not about the coffee. It never was. It's about what's brewing in the spaces between moments, in the pauses between orders, in the silence after closing time. And if you ever find yourself working the night shift, and the clock strikes 3:33 a.m., and you hear your own voice calling out orders from behind the counter, run. Run as fast as, you can. Just don't look back at your reflection. It might not be yours anymore. End. It all started 3 months ago when I took the graveyard shift. Sarah, the manager, warned me they had trouble keeping employees during these hours. At the time, I thought it was just the inconvenience of working overnight. Now, I know the real reason. My first night was quiet. Seattle sleeps, but never completely. We get the regulars, rideshare drivers, night shift nurses, desperate students seeking caffeine. You learn to recognize the faces, the routines. It was during my second week when I first noticed it. 3:33 a.m. The drive-thru had been empty for almost an hour when the sensors triggered. A black Chrysler, old model, impossible to identify the exact year through the grainy camera. The driver's window was down, but the interior was pure darkness. The voice that came through the intercom was wrong, like multiple voices speaking in unison but slightly out of sync. House coffee, 3 shots of espresso, no sugar. I prepared the order, my hands inexplicably shaky. When I got to the drive-thru window, the car was there, engine running, exhaust fumes forming faces in the cold night air. I extended the coffee through the window, but I couldn't see the driver. The darkness inside the car seemed dense, like it was something tangible. A pale hand, fingers too long, emerged from the shadows and took the cup. The fingers brushed against mine for a second, cold as ice and damp like wet leather. "Thank you, Daniel," the voice said. I had never introduced myself. The car drove off, leaving only the smell of coffee mixed with something metallic in the air. When I went back inside, every single cup in the store was turned upside down. All of them. And on the bottom of each one was written in ancient calligraphy. Soon, after that first night, the black car became a regular presence. 3:33, without fail. Same order, same voice, same pale hand emerging from the shadows. I started documenting each visit, first out of curiosity, then out of fear. It was after the third visit that Marcus, another night shift barista, disappeared. He was cleaning the machines while I was serving the black car. When I came back, I found only his green apron, folded with supernatural precision on the counter. The security cameras showed Marcus cleaning, then static for exactly 33 seconds, and then just the folded apron, as if he had simply ceased to exist. The police investigated, of course, but what could I say? That a ghost car appears every night? That the shadows in the store seem to move when no one's looking? That sometimes when I'm alone I hear voices whispering coffee orders in languages that shouldn't exist anymore? Sarah, the manager, acted like nothing had happened. "People quit all the time," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes, especially on the night shift. But I saw her expression when she looked at the folded apron, the recognition, the fear. She knew something. The following week, Amanda disappeared the same way. Then Carlos. Each disappearance preceded by the black car's visit, each leaving only a perfectly folded apron. And after each disappearance, small changes in the store. The lights grew dimmer, the coffee aroma more metallic, the shadows denser. The few regular night customers started avoiding the place as if instinctively sensing something was wrong. One night, while cleaning the counter, I found something carved into the wood, covered by years of varnish and spilled coffee. A message. 33 years. 33 disappearances. The ritual continues. The message on the counter disturbed me. I started researching the store's history, the disappearances. The public library had digitized archives of the Seattle Times dating back decades. What I found chilled my blood. 1957. 3 employees vanished from a local coffee shop. 1990. Series of mysterious disappearances in coffee shops around the area. 23. Now, years apart. Always the same pattern, but it was in a dusty archive in the library's basement that I found something even more disturbing. A photograph from 1957, showing the opening of the first Starbucks store. In the background, partially visible, was a black Chrysler, and leaning against it, smiling at the camera, was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was me, wearing the same green apron I wear today, with the same scar on my eyebrow that I got when I was 12. On the back of the photo, a single handwritten sentence: "The coffee must be served." The library discoveries led to an obsession. I started noticing patterns in the coffee beans used after each visit from the black car. They looked different, darker, as if they had absorbed something beyond the normal roasting process. One night after the car left, I took some beans to examine more closely. Under the light, they seemed to pulse with their own energy. And when I put them under hot water, the water didn't turn brown, but a deep, impenetrable black. In the reflection of the dark water, I saw faces, dozens of them. I recognized Marcus, Amanda, Carlos, all the missing ones. Their expressions were of pure terror, their mouths open in silent screams. I dropped the cup in shock. The black liquid spread across the floor in impossible patterns, forming symbols I recognized from the 1957 photo. Symbols that shouldn't exist? That's when Sarah appeared behind me. "You shouldn't have seen that," she said, her voice different. Now, the same voice from the drive-thru. "It wasn't your time yet." When I turned, her face was wrong, like an ill-fitting mask over something much older, much more terrible. "What's happening here?" I managed to ask. She smiled, her teeth now, long and dark like burnt coffee beans. "The ritual must continue. The coffee must be served. And someone needs to serve." Sarah told me everything that night. How Starbucks wasn't just a coffee chain, but something much older, much more sinister. The stores were PowerPoints built on energy lines that the ancients called Earth's veins. The ritual began long before the first store, before coffee was even discovered. It was about life force, about feeding something that lived in the shadows between realities. "Why do you think our logo is a siren?" Sarah asked, her face constantly shifting between human and something other. "It's not a siren. It never was. It's her, the first barista, the one who serves the coffee that keeps the things between sleeping." The black car, she explained, was merely a messenger, a physical manifestation of something much larger. The disappearances weren't deaths. They were recruitments. Every 33 years, new servers were needed, new baristas for the longest shift. Of all, the aprons, I said, finally understanding. "That's why they're left folded." Sarah nodded. "The uniform is the contract. When you wear the green, you serve forever, across all realities, all shifts, all stores that exist and will exist. And if I refuse?" Her smile widened impossibly. "You already accepted. In the 1957 photo, remember? Time isn't linear here. You've always been one of us. You always will be. That's why I'm recording this now. The black car is coming, but this time it's different. I can feel it. In the past few days, I've been seeing things in the coffee machines, reflections of other realities, other Starbucks in other worlds. In all of them, I see myself serving coffee to shadows, to things that wear human faces like ill-fitting masks. The coffee beans in the store are all black now, not brown. When ground, they whisper in ancient languages. The smell is of memories being consumed, of time being distilled into something more potent than caffeine. Sarah doesn't appear in her human form anymore. The green apron she wears seems made of living shadows, and her name tag constantly shifts between names and alphabets that should never have existed. The car is coming. I can hear the engine, not a normal engine, but the sound of realities being folded, of time being twisted. The voice in the drive-thru isn't a desynchronized chorus anymore. It's my own voice coming from every moment I've ever served or will serve coffee. House coffee. 3 shots of espresso. No sugar. My hands prepare the order automatically as if they've been doing it for centuries. Maybe they have. The drive-thru. Window opens to darkness. There isn't a car, not really. Just a void that hungers for something stronger than coffee. The hand that emerges isn't pale this time. It's my own hand, but from another time, another place. "It's time," says my voice. Our voice. I leave this recording as a warning, as testimony. If you find it, if you work the night shift, pay attention. When the black car arrives at 3:33, when the beans start whispering, when your reflection smiles before you do, run. But you won't. No one does. Because you already accepted the job. Long before you were hired. The coffee must be served. And we will serve. Forever. End of recording. Note found with the recording. To whoever finds this, don't look for me. I serve another shift now, in another time. The coffee is ready, and it's time for your break. Daniel Torres, Eternal Shift, Barista. I remember my first night at store No. 4873 like it was yesterday. The building itself was different from other Starbucks locations. A converted 3-story Victorian from the 1890s, with the cafe on the ground floor, storage on the second, and a basement that predated the building itself. The previous night supervisor, Amanda Chen, had left suddenly. No notice, no goodbye. Just an empty locker and a half-finished cup of coffee on the break room table. Her last text to the manager read, "Day 71. I understand now. I should have recognized that as the first warning sign. The store felt different. After midnight, the old wooden floors creaked without anyone walking on them. The vintage mirrors behind the counter showed reflections that moved a fraction of a second too late. And the smell, underneath the rich aroma of coffee, there was something else. Something metallic. It was during my first solo close that I noticed the first truly inexplicable thing. I was counting the register when movement caught my eye in the security monitor. A customer had appeared at the counter, though I hadn't heard the door chime. An elderly woman in dated clothes, her face obscured by shadow. The timestamp on the camera read 3:33 a.m. We closed at midnight. I turned to look at the counter, but no one was there. When I checked the footage later, the segment showing the woman was missing. Instead, there was only static and a single frame showing all the cafe chairs arranged in a circle, facing inward. But when I looked up from the monitor, the chairs were in their normal positions. That's when I found the logbook. It was hidden behind a loose brick in the basement wall, a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. The entries dated back to 1971, the year the first Starbucks opened. Each entry was from a different night supervisor, documenting increasingly strange occurrences. 71. The machines run themselves after 3 a.m. The coffee they brew smells wrong. 1982. Found customers' reflections lingering in the mirrors long after they've left. 1993. The shadows have started whispering drink orders and voices I recognize. 2004. The basement stairs go down further tonight. I counted 71 steps. Yesterday there were only 13. 2015. I can see them now. The ones who were here before. They wear our faces. Each account ended abruptly on the writer's 71st day. The final pages were written in brown ink that smelled suspiciously like old coffee, mixed with copper. But it was the last entry, dated just 2 months ago, that chilled me to the bone. It was from Amanda Chen, the supervisor I'd replaced. Day 70. Tomorrow they'll come for me like they came for the others. The store requires a sacrifice every 71 days. A new barista to join the eternal shift. If you're reading this, you're next. Count your days. On the 71st, don't look in the mirrors. Don't answer when they call your name. And whatever you do, don't drink what they brew. Below her entry was a series of symbols drawn in that same brown ink, arranged in a circular pattern. They seemed to move when viewed from the corner of my eye, rearranging themselves into familiar shapes. The Starbucks logo, but wrong somehow. Distorted. Ancient. I should have quit that night. Instead, I started counting days. By my third week, I'd started to notice patterns in our late-night customers. The same faces appearing night after night, ordering drinks that weren't on the menu and voices that echoed strangely in the empty cafe. There was the woman in the black dress, always ordering a dark roast from 1971. Her cup would remain scalding hot for hours, the liquid inside as black as tar. The businessman in the outdated suit, who only spoke in whispers and whose reflection showed him wearing a green Starbucks, apron stained with something dark. The young girl who appeared every night at 3:33 ordering a memory macchiato with exactly 71 pumps of the special syrup. She never drank it, just stared at her reflection in the surface until the liquid turned black. But it was the old man who worried me most. He came in every night around 2 a.m., ordered nothing, and sat watching the baristas with milky white eyes. His clothes changed with each visit, sometimes modern, sometimes decades old, but his face remained the same. After he left, we'd find messages written in coffee grounds on the counter, 1 day until joining. The first sip is forever. Every store needs its spirits. One night I checked the security footage of his visits. In the recordings, his seat was always empty, but in the background, dozens of figures in Starbucks aprons could be seen moving behind the counter, their faces obscured by darkness, making drinks for customers who weren't there. The timestamps on these segments always read 3:33 a.m., regardless of when they were recorded. Day 45 brought the first major change. The basement stairs began to extend downward, adding new steps each night. By day 50, I'd counted 71 steps descending into darkness. The original blueprint showed only 13. The extra steps led to a hidden sub-basement, a vast circular room that shouldn't have fit beneath the building. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different Starbucks store from a different time period. In the center stood an ancient espresso machine, its brass surfaces covered in those same symbols from the logbook. The machine ran constantly, though it wasn't connected to any power source. The coffee it brewed dripped upward, defying gravity, forming patterns in the air that looked like faces, familiar faces. Amanda Chen, the previous supervisors, all of them young, wearing Starbucks aprons from different eras, their eyes as dark as the coffee they served. In one mirror, I saw myself, making drinks alongside them though I was standing still. My reflection wore an apron stained with that same brown substance, and its name tag read, "Future Partner." The smell of copper grew stronger. I ran upstairs and locked the basement door, but each morning it was open again, the steps leading down, into deeper darkness, the sound of the machine growing louder, more insistent. By day 60, I could hear voices calling from below. "Join us. The eternal shift needs you. Spend days until forever." On day 65, the old man finally spoke to me directly. He appeared behind the counter without warning, though the doors were locked and the alarm was set. "You've lasted longer than most," he said, his voice like coffee grounds grinding. "Most run before they learn the truth." "What truth?" He smiled, revealing teeth stained dark. "About what really happened in 1971. About what makes Starbucks coffee so addictive," he told me then. About the ritual that created the first store. About the price paid for success. About the bargain made with something ancient that lived in the spaces between moments. In the steam rising from a perfect cup of coffee. In the mirrors that showed what was and what would be. Every 71 days, it requires a new servant, he explained. A new barista for the shifts that never end in the stores that exist outside of time. We're all here making drinks for the spaces between seconds, serving customers who died decades ago. The missing supervisors, not missing, promoted to the eternal shift. "Look," he handed me a cup of coffee that I hadn't seen him make. The liquid inside was darker than any coffee I'd ever seen, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Drink," he said. "See the truth for yourself." I didn't drink it, but later that night I found the cup in the break room, empty, except for grounds arranged in a message. Days remaining. The coffee must be served. Days 66 through 70 brought escalating strangeness. My reflections stopped matching my movements. The other baristas reported seeing me in 2 places at once. Security footage showed me making drinks after hours, though I knew I'd been home. The mirrors revealed more with each passing day. I saw other versions of our store, countless iterations stretching into infinity. In some, the baristas wore Victorian clothing. In others, futuristic aprons that glowed with inner light. But in every reflection, they all had the same dark eyes and stained teeth as the old man. The regulars stopped coming in, replaced by shadows wearing human faces like ill-fitting masks. They ordered drinks with impossible names. Temporal cappuccino, memories of tomorrow latte, the first roast. On day 70, I found photos in the logbook I hadn't noticed before. Staff photos from every year since 1971. I was in all of them, my face unchanged, wearing progressively older uniforms. In the 1971 photo, I stood next to the old man. We both held cups of that impossibly dark coffee. The final photo was dated, tomorrow, day 71. The store is different now. The walls breathe, the floors ripple like liquid. Every mirror shows a different version of me, all wearing that stained green apron, all serving coffee to shadows. The basement stairs now spiral endlessly downward, the ancient machines whirring, echoing up from the depths. The smell of copper and coffee is overwhelming. They're all here now. Every supervisor who disappeared, every barista who worked the eternal shift. Their faces flicker between young and old, past and future, human and something else. Amanda Chen stands behind the counter, her apron stained with that familiar brown substance. "The coffee must be served," she says in a voice that echoes through time. Someone must serve. The old man sits in his usual spot, but now I see him clearly. See what he truly is. He was the first, the one who made the original bargain. His coffee cup is full of that impossible darkness. The machines are running themselves, brewing drinks that defy physics and reason. The air is thick with steam that forms into faces. My face over and over from every possible timeline. They're offering me a cup now. The liquid inside moves. Like it's alive, like it contains all the moments that ever were or will be. I understand now why the logbook ended when it did. Why each supervisor stopped writing after day 71. The truth isn't in the words. It's in the coffee. It's always been in the coffee. I'm recording this as a warning, but I know it won't matter. You'll come anyway. You'll take the job, find the logbook, count the days. And on your 71st day, you'll understand too. Because time is different here. Because we've always been here, serving drinks in the spaces between seconds. Because the coffee must be served. And now it's time for my shift to begin. Final security footage shows Michael picking up the cup. His reflection moves before he does, wearing a stained apron and smiling with dark stained teeth. The timestamp reads 3:33 a.m. The cup is empty. The shift continues, and